If you close your eyes and imagine an English village in summer, maybe you see nothing but peace. The scene is gentle peasants wandering barefoot through golden fields, children chasing chickens, the local smith cooling off in the shade with a mug of ale, and mothers gossiping beside open windows as the warm sun floods their homes. The birds are singing, the wheat sways lazily in the breeze. It's easy, isn't it, to romanticize medieval summers as slow, sleepy and almost idyllic, like something out of a Renaissance painting or a tourist brochure selling the good old days. But before you get too comfortable, let me rip away that illusion. Because if you think a modern heatwave is bad, the truth about medieval summers will leave you speechless. Let's get real. Even in today's England, a little bit of sun is enough to throw the whole country into chaos. Public transport melts down, supermarkets run out of ice, emergency rooms overflow with heat stroke cases, and the news talks about record-breaking temperatures if the mercury creeps past 30 degrees Celsius. We moan, we sweat, we take selfies in front of fans and complain about how unprepared we are. But what if I told you that every single problem we have now, broken water systems, failed crops, food shortages, wildfires, diseases exploding in the heat, and people dying from nothing but the sun overhead were all 10 times worse in medieval England? And that for the vast majority of people, summer wasn't just uncomfortable. It was a season that separated the living from the dead. Forget your air conditioning, your cold drinks, your sunblock, or your right to stay home on a sweltering afternoon. For medieval villagers, there was no escape. Every dawn brought new dangers: heat that could kill, droughts that shriveled crops before harvest, wildfires that could swallow a village in an afternoon, and plagues that swept through the streets when the air itself began to stink. You want to know how they coped? Sometimes they didn't. Sometimes all you could do was watch your children shrivel with hunger or fever, or hope the well hadn't run dry, or that no one would die from a single sip of contaminated water. Sometimes the only thing separating your family from disaster was luck or the mercy of the weather gods. And the truth, even the tiniest lapse one day without enough water, 1 week of unbroken sun, a single spark on a thatched roof could turn a normal summer into a season of horror. Let's put things in perspective. When you see modern England shut down because of a heatwave, remember it's a joke compared to what your ancestors faced. They worked dawn to dusk in fields that boiled under the midsummer sun. They watched entire harvests rot, herds die of thirst, and neighbours fall dead with heat stroke before their eyes. They kept their doors and windows wide open at night, desperate for a breath of air, only to invite wild animals, thieves or worse, inside. The very things you take for granted, clean water, safe food, the ability to call an ambulance or hide indoors, simply did not exist. And that wasn't the worst of it. A medieval summer was a time when fear became your daily companion: fear of fire, fear of famine, fear of disease, fear that the world itself might just burn away before you could see the harvest. So the next time you find yourself complaining about the heat, or you see the headlines screaming about a catastrophic summer, ask yourself, could you survive a medieval summer stripped of every modern convenience? Would you outlast the droughts, the plagues, the wildfires, the poisoned wells, and the days so hot that even the churches were forced to pray for rain? And here's the kicker. Everything you thought was bad about a modern summer is nothing but a faint echo of what our ancestors endured. Your suffering is their luxury. What we call inconvenience, they called life or death. If that shocks you, good. Because this story isn't just about sweat and sunburn, it's about survival, tragedy, and the dark side of summer you were never told about in school. And trust me, by the time we're done, you'll never look at a heatwave the same way again. So if you want the raw, unfiltered truth about how people survived or didn't survive the most dangerous season of the medieval year, then smash that like button, share this video with anyone who's ever complained about the weather, and drop your wildest questions or reactions in the comments below. Because what you're about to hear isn't just history, it's a wake-up call. Are you ready? Let's burn down the myths and uncover the terrifying reality of a medieval summer. But before you think this is just theory or old legend, let's begin with a true story. So shocking it still echoes in Europe's historical memory, the summer of 1540, when the sun itself seemed to turn against mankind, and all of Western Europe became an oven, an inferno, not even the darkest nightmares could match. Picture this. For more than 11 straight months, the rain simply stopped. From Spain to Poland, from the Rhine valleys to the English countryside, clouds vanished from the sky, and the rivers that had given life to generations shrank to muddy scars across a parched earth. The mighty Elbe, the Seine, The Thames household names today dried up so thoroughly that people walked across their cracked beds where fish had once teemed and children had splashed only months before. Entire lakes disappeared. Crops shriveled into dust. Forests caught fire and burned for weeks on end. You think you know what a heatwave is? The chronicles of the time describe temperatures so extreme that birds fell dead out of the air, and wolves and bears desperate for water staggered into villages to die at people's feet. Cattle collapsed in the fields, pigs starved to death with nothing to eat but their own straw bedding. Wildfires consumed whole settlements and the wind carried the stink of rotten ash for miles. But the real horror was just beginning. With the water gone, starvation and thirst swept the land. Families wandered the roads, dragging their children behind them in search of a miracle. It was said that in some regions up to half the population died first to the weakest, then the strong, then even the wealthy and well-fed. The dead human and animal alike lined the banks of what rivers remained, or choked wells and ponds. Mass graves couldn't keep up, burials were hurried and shallow. In some towns the air grew so foul with the reek of death that priests held mass wearing cloths over their faces, and desperate survivors would throw lime on corpses and pray for rain more than for food. The churches themselves became scenes of pleading and panic. Day after day crowds gathered to beg the saints for deliverance. From Paris to Munich, bells tolled for special rain masses almost every week. Images of Christ and the Virgin were carried through dust-choked streets, icons held high while barefoot villagers trailed behind singing hymns with parched throats. And when the prayers failed, faith turned to fury. People blamed witches, outcasts, foreigners, anyone they thought had stolen the rain. Trials, accusations, even mob violence erupted as fear boiled over, and as the land baked so did law and order. In some places, once neighbours turned into thieves. Food stores were raided, farms attacked, and hungry mobs stormed city gates. Soldiers could not hold back the chaos. In the sweltering heat, justice itself dried up and blew away with the wind. Maybe you've heard the news about modern Europe's so-called heatwave of the century, but those pale in comparison to the cataclysm of 1540. Scientists now estimate that temperatures soared to 50 degrees Celsius in parts of France and Germany. There were days when no shade could offer relief, when people fainted and died on the spot, when all that stood between survival and extinction was a single bucket of foul water. So let's be brutally honest, could you really survive a summer like that? Could anyone stripped of every modern comfort and protection outlast 11 months of relentless sun with no water, no food, and the world on fire? It's easy to forget, but history's most brutal disasters weren't always sudden explosions. They were slow, suffocating, and all-consuming, the kind of horror that drips from day to day until hope itself dries up. The drought of 1540 wasn't just a bad summer. It was a year-long test of human limits, a time when every boundary between wealth and poverty, order and chaos, life and death was erased by the merciless sun. So as we dig deeper into the real dangers of a medieval summer, remember this. Every comfort we take for granted today was paid for by the suffering of millions who came before us. And when the next heatwave comes, and it will we really be any better prepared? If this reality shakes you, don't keep it to yourself. Smash that like button. Share this video with anyone who thinks a little sun is nothing to worry about, and drop a comment. Do you honestly think you'd survive 50 degrees with nothing to drink? Or would you be just another story lost in the dust of history? Because this is only the beginning. The true nightmare of summer is just heating up. If you thought relentless drought was terrifying, imagine a killer. You can't see, can't predict, and can't escape a disease that creeps in silently with the summer heat, then explodes like a match tossed into dry straw. For the people of England in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, this nightmare had a name whispered in terror: sweating sickness. It didn't matter who you were, peasant or lord merchant or monk. When the sweating sickness struck, no one was safe. The first sign was always innocent enough: a sudden chill, a strange unease, a faint headache on an ordinary hot day. Within hours, victims would be drenched in sweat, their skin slick and clammy as though they'd stood in a rainstorm fully clothed. Their hearts pounded wildly, their breath came in frantic gasps, and many collapsed, where they stood too weak to cry for help. Doctors, such as they were, could do nothing but watch. Medieval medicine had no explanation, no cure, no defence. Bleeding, herbs, prayers, charms, none of it worked. Priests moved from house to house delivering last rites so quickly that sometimes a whole street would be dead before the sun went down. Families locked their doors and shunned their neighbours, but it made no difference. The sweating, the fever, the rapid heartbeat, the wild confusion, and then almost always sudden death. Some victims died within just 3 hours of their first symptoms. Rich or poor, young or old, men and women alike, no one could buy a moment's safety. Imagine the panic. You go to bed thinking about the next day's harvest, only to find at dawn your family cold and still beside you. In the countryside, entire villages fell silent overnight, leaving only the caw of crows and the fearful whispers of survivors. In the towns, death carts rattled through the streets, hauling away bodies so quickly there was no time to grieve. And the smell, the unforgettable stench of sweat and death, haunted every alley. Take the summer of 1528. In just a few weeks, the sweating sickness swept across England, striking London like a thunderclap. Thousands died in a matter of days. Some parishes lost half their people. Royalty and commoners died side by side. Records from the time are filled with desperation letters full of pleas for mercy, chronicles where the number of the dead overtakes every other event. Doctors themselves died faster than they could diagnose. There were reports of entire medical households wiped out in a single afternoon. Theories abounded: bad air, bad luck, divine wrath, but none could explain how the disease travelled so quickly, or why the summer's heat seemed to bring it to life. Prayers went unanswered. Towns were abandoned. Markets and churches emptied. Even the bravest ran in terror, fleeing only to carry the sickness to the next village. If you think COVID-19 moved fast, try to imagine an invisible enemy that could empty a whole village overnight, no warning, no cure, just a wave of terror followed by silence. It was as if death itself had slipped inside every home, every barn, every chapel, choosing victims at random and snuffing out their lives before anyone had time to beg for a miracle. So the next time you hear about a modern pandemic or feel safe behind your medicine and technology, remember this: once a summer, plague turned England into a land of haunted ruins and broken prayers. One day you'd be talking with your neighbour in the marketplace. The next you'd see his face on the death cart or be gone yourself. Sweating. Sickness. A 2-word warning from history that summer's real danger was never just the sun. And if you think nothing could move faster than news on the internet, remember the deadliest things in history always arrive without a sound. Now, as we peel back another layer of medieval summer's horrors, let's ask just how far would people go and what would they sacrifice in the desperate hope of survival, or simply to preserve an image of power and beauty in a merciless world? If you were born a peasant, your summer fate was decided under the open sky. Sunburnt skin, blistered hands, hair stiff with sweat and hay, you bore the unmistakable badge of poverty. But if you were a woman of the aristocracy, the game was altogether different. For the nobility, a fair pale complexion was more than a beauty ideal. It was a symbol of wealth status, and the privilege to avoid the sun-soaked agony of manual labour. In a world where toiling outdoors was the lot of the poor, only those with power could afford to keep their skin untouched by sunlight. But what price would they pay for this illusion? To the noble women of medieval and Renaissance Europe, avoiding even the faintest tan became an obsession, one that would lead them down the darkest of chemical paths. The beauty secrets passed from mother to daughter, maid to mistress, were anything but safe. They were rituals of risk and slow destruction. Imagine smearing your face daily with a paste made of white lead, a heavy metal so toxic it would slowly paralyze the nerves, destroy the kidneys, and eventually rot the brain. Or dusting your cheeks with mercury, convinced it would preserve your porcelain glow, even as it poisoned your blood and triggered hallucinations. The truly desperate and the truly wealthy went further, mixing rosewater with the powdered chalk arsenic and even urine or pigeon droppings, all to achieve the ghostly pallor that marked them as above the masses, and it worked at least on the surface. Noble ladies walked the courts of England and France with skin as pale as death itself, envied by all. But beneath those flawless facades, poison was doing its work. Hair thinned and fell out in clumps, teeth loosened and turned black. Young women in the bloom of life grew confused, depressed, or violently ill. Cursed doctors whispered, never guessing the curse lay in their powder boxes. Some slipped into madness, others died in agony, their families baffled by symptoms that no prayer could cure. The irony was cruel. In the frantic race to avoid a peasant sunburn, many noble women traded a long, healthy life for a slow death in perfumed chambers. They escaped the fields only to become prisoners of their own vanity, poisoning themselves inch by inch, year by year, all for a beauty that promised power but delivered only suffering. Let's be blunt. Would you choose to work beneath the burning sun, your skin bronzed but your health intact? Or would you lock yourself in a gilded room smearing death on your face every morning for the sake of appearance? Would you rather be a peasant toughened by labour, or a lady slowly dying in a fog of toxic luxury? History rarely asks these questions, but you should. The next time you see a painting of a medieval queen, luminous and pale, remember what that beauty cost and ask yourself if you would have paid the price. So as the deadly summer rolls on, remember, not all of its victims fell in the fields. Some died much more quietly behind closed doors, sacrificed on the altar of perfection. Yet for those outside those perfumed chambers, peasants, townsfolk, even restless noble sons, the merciless heat of summer brought a different kind of rebellion. When every hour under the blazing sun felt like torture and homes became ovens, the urge to seek relief overcame even the strictest social codes. In villages, market towns and cities across medieval Europe, public bathing surged into a wild, almost anarchic trend that no priest law or custom could entirely suppress. Imagine this. The midday sun blazes over the fields, the air thick as boiling broth, and there is no escape. One by one, men, sometimes women, cast off their sweat-soaked clothes and wade straight into the nearest river pond or mill stream. Laughter echoes, bare skin glistens, social ranks dissolve in the water. At the riverbank, it's not just peasants and farmhands, but craftsmen servants, merchants, even the occasional noble who forgets themselves in a desperate quest for relief. The need for cool water is so absolute it wipes away centuries of etiquette and taboo in a single collective gasp. It was a revolution of flesh, one that shocked authorities to the core. In the summer of 1392, in the city of Cologne, chroniclers record that dozens were publicly whipped or fined for the scandal of mass naked bathing. Priests thundered from their pulpits, branding the swimmers as sinful warning that public nudity would bring down God's wrath. Town councils issued bans, sent constables to patrol the riversides, even threatened excommunication. But all too often the heat won. With the mercury soaring, rules and reputations evaporated. Bathers returned in droves, laughter and shrieks drifting downriver as fathers, sons, neighbours, and yes, sometimes even mothers and daughters dove in together, discarding shame as readily as they shed their clothes. Pause for a moment. Can you picture it? Imagine your neighbours, your friends, even your family stripped of every pretense under the unrelenting sun, sharing the same muddy riverbank not just to bathe but to survive. The summer of no boundaries brought communities together in strange, unexpected ways. For a brief, shimmering moment, all that mattered was finding relief from the suffocating heat. But this collective vulnerability came at a price. Most medieval people never learned to swim. Swimming was considered both unnecessary and in some circles improper. So every summer, as rivers filled with overheated bodies, accidental drownings surged. Some days 3 or 4 villagers would disappear beneath the surface, lost to exhaustion, panic, or simple inexperience. The desperate desire to cool off so often ended in tragedy that even the threat of public punishment seemed trivial by comparison. Can you imagine it? Would you push to the edge by suffocating heat, throw caution and modesty to the wind and leap into the water with your entire village? What would you give for a moment of cool freedom if you knew it might be your last? But if the desperate plunge into rivers was a gamble for relief, a game of chance where some paid with their lives for a fleeting moment of comfort, then behind the closed doors of noble houses an entirely different, quieter risk was unfolding. Not every death of a medieval summer was dramatic, public, or quick. Many tragedies crept silently masked by perfume and powder, taking root not in the fields or the rivers, but in the very mirror of wealth and beauty. For in the world of the medieval and early modern aristocracy, the obsession with pale, unblemished skin was not simply a matter of fashion or vanity. It was an unspoken law. Sun-darkened faces marked you as lowly, common, or labouring. A flawless porcelain complexion declared you as someone who never toiled under the sun, as someone elevated, set apart by privilege and class. In a world where appearance could mean the difference between power and obscurity, women, especially those who moved at court, became slaves to their reflection. The recipes for maintaining this fatal beauty were handed down like sacred secrets, white lead mixed with vinegar and rose water for the perfect foundation, a touch of mercury for that ethereal glow, a dusting of powdered chalk, or even arsenic for the silken finish. Some instructions were more bizarre, add ground pearls, pigeon droppings, even urine to the mix. These were no cheap remedies for the poor. These were the prized, expensive concoctions that only the richest households could afford, the potions that kept the sun at bay while promising eternal youth. But beneath every layer of powder, death was working patiently. Lead mercury and arsenic did not simply irritate the skin or cause a few headaches. The poisons entered the blood and began to warp the mind and body from within. Women who had once been admired for their beauty grew pale and weak, their gums bleeding, their teeth loosening and turning black. More insidiously, these toxic metals invaded the nervous system, causing trembling confusion, blinding headaches, even seizures. Mood swings became common, anxiety and melancholy set in. Nightmares and wild hallucinations crept into their dreams, while in waking hours some experienced paranoia, so deep that they believed themselves haunted or cursed. There are dozens of documented cases from the courts of Europe in which noble women, once witty, clever and strong-willed, were suddenly overtaken by fits of madness. Some began to hear voices or see visions. Others, once gentle, erupted in unpredictable rage or spiraled into deep depression. Many lost the ability to speak or walk, and when physicians failed to cure them, suspicion quickly turned to the supernatural. One chilling story often recounted in French chronicles concerns a countess celebrated for her striking white skin, rumoured to be the envy of all Paris. After years of using a particularly potent lead-based cream, she began suffering from wild mood swings, hallucinations, and episodes where she would scream for hours, convinced invisible spirits were tormenting her. Her husband, unable to help and shamed by court gossip, summoned priests and exorcists, believing his wife was possessed by demons. The household descended into fear. Her servants whispered about curses and the evil eye. She died, raving, still clutching her jar of cosmetic paste. Only centuries later did scholars understand that her haunting was not the work of devils, but slow, relentless lead poisoning. Other women fared little better. In England and Italy, letters and diaries from noble families mention wives or daughters who lost their wits, became hysterical or simply wasted away. Marriages collapsed, inheritances shifted, family reputations were ruined. Often doctors of the day blamed the moon humours or witchcraft, never suspecting the culprit was resting on every lady's vanity table. It didn't end with madness. Many of these women were rendered infertile, their bodies unable to bear children after years of heavy metal exposure. Some died suddenly of organ failure. Others lived on shunned and isolated, unable to recognise their own faces in the mirror. The tragedy was compounded by secrecy. Even as rumours of madness or demonic possession swirled through noble circles, few dared to challenge the cult of whiteness and the deadly potions it demanded. Perhaps the cruelest irony of all is this: the dangers of medieval summer did not fall only upon the poor who toiled in the sun or drowned in muddy rivers. They claimed victims in brocade and silk, in perfumed chambers and marble halls among the rich, the privileged, the envied. While peasants risked their lives for a gulp of cool water, noble women quietly surrendered their bodies and minds to the pursuit of beauty. For some, death came by sunstroke or accident. For others, it arrived softly through the touch of powder on a cheek, the whisper of a brush, and the unblinking gaze of a mirror that never revealed the truth. So if you think privilege and wealth guaranteed safety in a medieval summer, think again. Sometimes the deadliest enemy was the one hiding in plain sight, waiting patiently in the very act of self-admiration, promising grace and power, but delivering only sickness, madness, and slow oblivion. Yet in a medieval summer, stretched thin by drought, even the enemy, you could see your neighbours, your own family. The sound of laughter itself could suddenly become forbidden. As the land cracked, the rivers shrank, and prayers for rain went unanswered. A new kind of madness crept into village squares and city streets, the madness of rules, bans, and punishments that twisted desperation into law. It may sound unbelievable, but history's parchments are filled with edicts so bizarre they almost read like dark satire. In parts of France, Germany, and even England, authorities issued strict bans on public festivities whenever drought took hold. The logic was simple, and in a way, terrifying joy itself was dangerous. Laughter, singing, and the pounding of drums or feet on hard ground were declared an insult to God and the saints. Why? Because any show of happiness, any dance or feast under a pitiless sky might anger the divine powers further and prolong their punishment. So at the height of summer's misery town, criers marched through the streets to announce no more singing, no more dancing, no markets with musicians, no weddings with music or open-air celebration, no feasts under the trees until the heavens opened and the rain fell again. Anyone caught defying these rules risked severe punishment. Fines were steep. Repeat offenders faced public humiliation, loss of property, even prison. Picture it a village at dusk, children's voices silenced, musicians' lutes packed away, and weddings held in whispered gloom. If you so much as whistled a tune or raised your voice in a joke, a neighbour could report you to the magistrate. The laughter of a community which once stitched the fabric of survival together became a threat. In some towns, entire festivals were cancelled for years at a time, with the town square left eerily empty, no bonfires, no parades, just the anxious gaze of people searching the sky for clouds. Behind these laws lay more than just superstition. They were the desperate reaction of leaders, mayors, priest-lords who needed to give the suffering a sense of control, however illusory. If you do not tempt fate, perhaps fate will relent. The bans gave structure to chaos, but they also fed a dangerous spiral as hope withered, suspicion flourished. Those who smiled, those who sang in secret became scapegoats. That's why it hasn't rained, someone would whisper. They brought this on us. What began as an effort to restore order soon fractured the fragile bonds of community. Fearful, exhausted, and searching for someone to blame, people sometimes turned on each other. In some villages, crowds gathered to punish or shun those accused of defying the bans, their desperation fueling a cycle of paranoia and retribution. This wasn't just a battle against the sky, it was a battle within as anxiety and superstition spread faster than any wildfire. One chronicler described a year in southern Germany where laughter was so rare that it was said the only songs heard were the prayers for rain and the wailing of mothers. And could you imagine it? Could you survive a summer where even joy was outlawed, where a joke, a wedding dance, or a child's laughter might cost your family its freedom or its home? Have you ever lived through a time when smiling or singing could get you fined, jailed, or worse, just because the rain refused to fall? So now, as the last echoes of medieval summer's agony fade into the night, let's face the truth. Head-ons. Summer was never just a season for toiling in the fields or sweating beneath a relentless sun. For our ancestors, it was a crucible, a months-long trial by fire, where survival was never guaranteed, and the line between life and death was as thin as a single breath. From droughts that left rivers dry and fields barren to plagues that crept in with the summer heat to wildfires that devoured entire villages, the threats came from all directions. The wealthy tried to shield themselves with powders and creams only to fall victim to invisible poisons. The poor stripped away their dignity for a fleeting moment of cool relief, risking drowning in rivers or exposure to the merciless sun. Rules and taboos collapsed as desperation grew, while bans on laughter and celebration turned communities into tense, silent shells of themselves. Even the joy of a wedding or a child's laughter could be outlawed as fear and superstition took hold. What's left in the end is the simple, unyielding reality that summer was not just about heat, it was about vulnerability. It was about the razor's edge, where a day of hard work could end in disaster, where privilege meant little in the face of disease, and where hope itself was often in short supply. It was a season that demanded resilience, courage, and more than a little luck. So what do we learn from the relentless scorching summers of the Middle Ages? That the comforts we enjoy today, the clean water, the air conditioning, the endless options for safety are not guaranteed forever. Nature's power has not diminished, and all it takes is one long, unbroken heatwave, one unexpected drought, one mistake for the old chaos to return. If you had to face a medieval summer, what would you choose? Would you toil in the fields and risk the burning sun, take your chances in the river, or lock yourself away and trust in dangerous remedies? Would you obey the bans and hide your laughter, or rebel for a taste of joy no matter the cost? Let us know in the comments below, what would your survival strategy be if you lived in the medieval world? Would you burn, swim, pray, or break the rules? And as you drift off to sleep tonight, remember, history is not a distant land, but a mirror. The same fears, the same struggles, the same desperate hopes still haunt us whenever the sun climbs too high in the sky. So cherish every cool breeze, every safe drink of water, every moment of peace. Don't miss our next journey, because if you think summer was brutal, wait until you discover the bone-chilling reality of a medieval winter. Was it really any easier to survive when the nights grew long and the frost set in? For now, may your dreams be gentle, your night be restful, and your imagination carry you safely beyond the shadow of that ancient, relentless sun. Good night and good luck.